Welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast, the show that invites you to take a seat around the community fire and listen to stories that inspire. I'm your host, Kathy Robinson, author, coach, and founder of Athena Wellness, a company that's dedicated to supporting you on your journey to live more wholeheartedly. Hello and welcome. Thanks so much for joining me. For the last year, I have been woodshedding. Woodshedding is a term used by musicians that means to rehearse relentlessly. Jazz musicians take it one step further as a way of honoring the hard work done in private to develop the chops needed to play flawlessly with others in public. In my case, my self-imposed professional isolation was so I could create my first online course offering. It's only been a few days since its debut, and I'm feeling a little like a proud parent, both exhausted by the birthing process, yet at the ready to share as much as I can about my newborn. What I wanted to share today was the audio from a masterclass webinar that I offered last week to kick off the course launch. I should mention that the course is called From Type A to Type B, How to Mindfully Descend the Corporate Ladder and Invite What's Next. And it's about the journey from head to heart that's available to us as we transition from long-term careers. But this conversation is more than just about post-corporate life. It's about finding the opportunity in major life transitions to live differently, to live in alignment with who you truly are, to live wholeheartedly. And my trusty companion in this conversation is Dawn Jarvis, a former nurse turned entrepreneur who is amazing, as you'll soon hear, as she shares her life experiences as I do mine. About 2/3 of the way through, I share a bit about the course, and I encourage you to listen through to the end. Let's just say we wrap up on a high note. I'll put links to the video version of this conversation in the show notes, as well as where you can get more information on the course. And, of course, you're always welcome to send me a note at info@athenawellness.com. You know I love hearing from you. And now on to the show. I hope you enjoy the conversation and find it inspiring. All right. Well, welcome, everybody. My name is Kathy Robinson, and I'm so glad you're here today. And for those who know me and I sound a little off, I had a really good time at the beach last week. So it may go in and out, but my capable host, who I'd like to thank, Dawn Jarvis, for being here, is going to be my wing person. And once Dawn introduces herself in a bit, you'll see that you are in capable hands, along with the many talents that she has. She's a very wonderful podcast host, and she's very good at what she does. So thank you, Dawn, for joining us today. So I'm going to start us off by telling you a bit more about myself. I'll give you an overview of how we'll spend our time together, and then I'll turn it over to Dawn, and she can get us started. So first, a little about me. I'm the founder of Athena Wellness, a company that helps people holistically reinvent themselves at midlife. As you may know, Athena was a Greek goddess who signified both strength and wisdom, two qualities that I help my clients access in themselves. I focus on online education through the Athena Wellness Academy. I host the Athena Wellness Podcast, and I've written a book called The Athena Principles, Simple Wellness Practices for Overworked Professionals. And being an overworked professional was something I knew a little about because I wasn't always in the wellness business. In fact, I spent over 30 years in corporate America, the first 18 years on Wall Street and the last 15 years for a Fortune 250 company, where I was the chief audit executive and the chief risk officer. Over the years, though, I became so passionate about wellness. Wellness was my release valve when I was a professional. And I found that I felt fitter in my 50s than I did in my 30s. So much so that I became a certified wellness coach and started Athena Wellness because I wanted to help others navigate their own wellness and life transitions. And that's what we'll be talking about today, how to help you prepare for and navigate your post-corporate life. So here's what we'll be talking about today. Once Dawn introduces herself, we'll share what surprised us most in our post-corporate journey. And then I'll give you some quick wins that you can implement today by sharing some actionable takeaways from my class from type A to type B, how to mindfully descend the corporate ladder and invite what's next. I'll provide recommendations for those who are still working in the corporate world, as well as for those who have already left. And then I'll share a bonus offer for those who are interested in learning more about the course, because I'll be facilitating a live experience of the course in September. We'll answer your pre-submitted questions, and then we'll wrap up on some closing thoughts on how to reimagine post-corporate life. Wherever you find yourself in your life journey today, my intention is to have you leaving here feeling uplifted and feeling inspired and feeling like your best years are ahead. So with that, let's begin. Dawn, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. My name's Dawn Jarvis. I am a registered nurse, and I retired from my job, which was as a corporate nurse, and I had been nursing for 35 years. And I was laid off, and I decided to take early retirement at the same time. And so what I do now, I have my own business, which is around diversity in healthcare consultancy. And as Kathy said, I've got a podcast where I talk to people about their career journey. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here and to sort of like share Kathy's journey. Kathy has actually been on my podcast, but it's really good to see how she has utilised her experiences and is sharing that with other people to help them. And one of the things that surprised me, and we'll talk about this a bit later, is sort of like what a transition sort of like moving into retirement is at that life stage. And it was something that I never really thought about. So I'm really looking forward to what Kathy has to say. So that's my introduction. And shall we go straight into it, Kathy?
Let's do it. Absolutely.
So one of the questions that I ask in my podcast, and I'm going to ask you too, Kathy, is tell me a bit about your journey, and particularly about the journey, so when you made that decision to retire. Was it a planned thing, or did it come up all of a sudden? Just talk us through what actually happened when you made that decision.
Absolutely, yeah. And the answer, like many things in life, is yes and no. Planned in that I started thinking about it when I turned 50, knowing that the math would work in my favor when I turned 55, that I could retire. I would have the years in age, and I would have the years with the company. And so it was this fun time of experimentation, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit, on how you can use that as kind of like a parallel track that time. I had two reporting lines in the company that I worked for. As the chief audit executive, I reported directly to the board, to the audit committee chair, and also to the corporate CFO. And within a month, right after my 54th birthday, both gentlemen said that they were planning on retiring. And I knew instantly in that moment that I didn't have it in me after 33 years to reestablish myself under new management. I really enjoyed working for who the replacement would have been at the board level. I knew her well, but the new person for the CFO, there was a long search. I didn't even know who that person was. And without even knowing a name, I just knew I didn't have that. So yes, it was planned. I was thinking about it, but I thought I'd be able to pull that trigger when I was 57, when I was 60, when I was 62. And at 54, I was like, oh, you got to get serious about this. And so I decided that when I hit 55, that I was going to retire. How about you, Dawn? What was your journey like?
Well, that's really interesting. So I know Kathy, and we did a course together, and we were in a mastermind together. And I did not know that you decided to retire at 55. So that's amazing to hear. And I had thought, like you, when I turned 50, I thought about, how did I want to spend the rest of my career and what did I want to be doing? And I think retirement is quite a loaded word, isn't it? So actually, retirement wasn't on my mind. As a nurse in the UK, you can retire at 55, and my plan was to sort of like work up to that and ease my way out and sort of like think about what I was going to do. But I wasn't going to retire. I was going to leave the service I was working in and do something else. And I wanted to start my own business up. So what actually happened for me is we had a large reorganization, and retirement became an option. And it wasn't something that I'd thought about before at all. And in my head, obviously, I had some assumptions about what that meant, and how I would be spending my life. And one of the things I want to sort of like share with you guys is that I sort of still, I suppose, don't retirement means, what does it mean? Does it mean you're walking by the beach? Does it mean I haven't got a partner? Are you with a partner? Is there grandchildren, which just horrifies me? I'm not at that stage in my life. So, but yeah, I was like you, I had enough years, I had enough it was an option, and it became the right thing to do, but it had a lot of feelings. I was with my feelings, shall we say, Kathy, and I wasn't expecting that. Maybe because it came from nowhere, and I think some of the things that maybe you'll talk about in your course, in the work that you do, is that we don't think about that, and do we need to prepare earlier and think about how we're going to spend that stage of our lives. So I think particularly working in corporate, you're so busy that you're not really thinking about those things. But things can come from left field, whether it's the time or your health or your circumstances. And I think it'd be really good to prepare for that.
So why don't we get into some of the surprises? Even though we both sort of prepared and we were thinking about it, I think we've both been upended a bit. So let me get into, there were three things that came to mind as I was thinking about this. And I'm already sensing some themes emerging just in what you said and in what your experience has been. So here are my three. First is, it will feel different than expected. Everyone around you is still in their own rhythm. They're going to work. Everything is the same for them. But your life has changed and has been interrupted in ways that even though you've planned for it, there's no way of knowing what that's going to feel like on the other side. There's an identity loss. Even if you weren't fully aligned or didn't fully identify with your profession. So as an example, there are people that I'm sure they're the doctors, they're the lawyers, they're the people that's how they lead in life. Like if I did that as the chief audit executive, I'd have no friends, right? So it's like, it wasn't something that I would lead with in conversation of, hey, I'm a chief audit executive. So I didn't have that strong identity. But that said, I was still part of a 60,000 person organization. I was still part of corporate America. And you lose that identity when you walk out the door for the first time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the way forward, even if you think you have a path, it's not evident. You have to find your way. And I wasn't expecting that. Metaphorically, it's what I call this path from head to heart, because the answers aren't linear. They're not logical. And that was my skill set, right? I could think my way out of something. But you mentioned the word before, like you were feeling the feelies. This is a time where you have to feel your way forward. And that's certainly something that I had to learn. The third thing is, the process mimics nature, a metamorphosis, if you will. And it's subtle. It happens slowly each day. And it's also miraculous. Like the caterpillar turns into the butterfly. So you're in the middle of this big transformation process, but the incremental change can feel like it's happening very slowly. So those were some thoughts that I had. Does anything there resonate, or is there anything that you'd like to add to that, Dawn?
Absolutely. It all resonates. All of what you said resonates, particularly sort of the journey and people being in their own rhythm, because people are doing what they are doing. And I had friends who were a little bit older than me that retired before I did, and what the things I noticed was their change in pace. And people I used to speak to every day, there was a difference in sort of timing of when we would get together and how that would be, because the amount of time they had was different. Um, what other things I wanted to add is that I was shocked by how I wanted to mark my actual leaving, as a not necessarily a celebration, but sort of a recognition of what of my years in the health service. And what was interesting, so I retired during the pandemic, and everybody started working at home, and things were very, very different. We were in crisis mode. And so I didn't have a party. I didn't have that. I didn't have that recognition, and and I still feel a way about that. And I was surprised about how important that is to me, because I know that from some other work I've done, that actually recognizing, celebrating success is quite important, and sort of like reflection on your career is important too. And then and the last thing I would say is it's sort of like how the identity piece that you mentioned. I'd spent my entire working career with my identity as a nurse. And that, I still do, but I did that consciously to help me manage the transition. That might change for me, but the way that I was able to maintain some semblances is that yes, I'm retiring from this job, but I'm still in my identity is still that, and I'm still working through how I actually do that. And depending on what you want to do when you retire, I think that's one of the things you need to think about. When what resonated with me is that you said, oh, I can say I'm a nurse, I'm a doctor. You didn't feel that. You could say I'm a chief audit officer, and then what are you going to say when you're retired? You're going to say I'm Kathy, and I'm amazing, obviously. But the importance that we place on titles is quite a thing to think about. How do we describe ourselves? What are we? And I didn't realize how important that was. So we have talked about some of the surprises that we have both gone through, and I think people in the audience, people watching this would be that they'd be thinking, so yeah, I can see that, but how do you manage? How do you prepare for them? What can you do proactively to support yourself when you're going through this process? What would you say, Kathy?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of practices. And so what I thought I would do is give some suggestions for those who were still in corporate and for those who have already left. And I'll pause, and Dawn, I'll get your thoughts on if there's anything else that you would add, or if there's anything that resonates for you as I'm kind of talking about this. So the reason why I'm a big fan of practices is that they're really just simple actions that we do for the purpose of learning and growing and experiencing. So having a new experience. And in our case, it's learning how to shift from our default settings. One of the things that I found is that, coming out of corporate, there are deep behavioral grooves that have just been embedded in us. Like you don't even realize it. So we default to this, and it's hard to get into our natural rhythms. For me, I didn't even know what my natural rhythms were. My coffee pot used to go off at like 3:45 in the morning. And that's whether it was my natural rhythm or not, it's not. That's what used to happen. So how do we get into how we're wired? And that can be unsettling because we may not know. So practices are just a safe way for us to be able to experiment. And the suggestions do vary. So let's start with folks who are in the planning phase, as Dawn and I were way back when we were 50, and we were pondering what retirement might be like, what post-corporate life might be like. So the question, and I love holding questions, the question that was a game changer for me was, how do I want to spend my time? Until I was 50 years old, believe it or not, I never asked myself that question. It sounds really sad to me now, but my life was too structured to even entertain like that felt like a luxury. But it became a crucial question as I began to think about, what do I want the second act of my life to be like? What do I want to be involved with? And I found my answer by looking at the media that I was consuming. What was I reading? What was I listening to? What podcasts was I listening to? And they were all things about healthy eating and endurance sports at the time, writing, creativity, spirituality played a big part, simplicity, nature, to name a few. And when I stepped back, I found that this all had to do with wellness, of living a good life. And so I followed that trail. And while I was still working my corporate job, I studied to become a wellness coach, created Athena Wellness. And in that last year, while I was still employed, I started blogging and writing my book. So things that didn't interfere with my career, but kind of like a parallel track to get me ready, almost like having training wheels. So with that in mind, I would invite you to ask yourself the same question. How do you want to spend your time? And knowing that it's not an easy question to answer, I would suggest a few ways to begin to experiment. And the first is to explore the times in your career when you felt in flow. So the time when time just kind of melt away, what activity just kind of gets you lost? For me, I love putting together big puzzles and telling the story, which was perfect for what I did, right? What happened in this 60,000 person company the last quarter? How do I get that down into a half-hour presentation for the board of directors? So how do I synthesize all of this stuff? And it helped me in my life post-corporate. Identify your key turning points, both professional and personal. For me, I couldn't run a lap around a track when I was in my 30s, but I ran my first marathon and ultra marathon in my 50s. What was that story? That was all about wellness. So looking at that turning point helped me hone in on what really kept my interest over a long period of time. Engaging with your heart to do things that you enjoy just to see where it leads. So are there activities you always wanted to try? In preparing for this talk, it made me remember, and it's been a really long time. When I was in college, I got voted most likely to become an entrepreneur. And then I went into corporate life for 30 years. So that led me to what are some of the things that people have seen in you years ago, decades ago, that maybe you didn't see back then? Is there something there that you want to get in touch with or start to play with again? And then the last thing is to create a place to dream and to dream big. And for me, I bought a little bullet journal. It was $18 back in probably 2017. And I started to keep notes of what Athena Wellness might be. But what it did, I look back at that now, and that's like pencil sketch blueprints for the life that I'm living today. So having a place that you can dedicate to jot down some of those thoughts would be a great way to get started. The second practice, I say contemplation because meditation has a whole heavy thing around it. But I do something, and I did something when I was in corporate called hand over heart breathing. And it was really simple. It was a place that I could connect with what I now call my still point. I didn't know what it was when I was doing it back then. But when I was at my busiest, I was just yearning for a time where I didn't have to make a decision and nobody needed me. Like just 5 minutes of that a day. And so the way you can do it, and this is how I did it, you wake up in the morning, you set your timer for 5 minutes, put your hand over your heart, stay in bed, get comfy, and just be mindful and know that for the next 5 minutes, you don't have to make a decision and nobody needs you. And just be in that space and gently remind yourself that there is nothing to do. And what that does is it gives you an access point to that Athena part of yourself, that wise part of yourself. And you'll find that things come to mind that maybe wouldn't come to mind when you're in the busiest parts of your day. So I also suggest keeping a notebook nearby just to see what might bubble up. But what you will find is that over time, that time will want to expand. And so this just gives you a place that maybe you don't do it in the morning, but maybe you take a walk on the weekends and you start to connect with that part of yourself. The last thing, the action, I wrote down, try, try, try. So this is a wonderful time of experimentation. As you start to answer the question, how do I want to spend my time? Try things. So as an example, in those 5 years leading up to my retirement, I found that even while I was working, I was attracted to things like boot camp to keep in shape. That led me to trail running. It led me to endurance sports. It led me to ultra marathoning. It led me to culinary courses to learn how to prepare plant-based foods for athletes to help with recovery as I was getting older. And that led to a Google search on wellness coaching. And over that whole time, and I think this is really important, over this whole period of time, I kept gauging, how does this activity make me feel? So as an example, I knew I loved fitness. And even though I entertained being a personal trainer, I didn't want to be tied to a facility that I had to show up to. Same thing with cooking. I love cooking. I love preparing healthy food, but to be a chef and have to report to work, like I had done that for 30 years. So where that landed me was I knew it gave me clarity that I wanted my business to be creative, to be lucrative so I could support myself, but also to be portable so I could work anywhere. So this wonderful time of experimentation, as you ask yourself, how do you want to spend your time? Give yourself this time and this gift. It really is a wonderful investment. So I'm just going to pause there. Dawn, is there anything that you would add to folks who are still in the work world, who are contemplating what they might want to do next?
First of all, I want to say that's an amazing sort of like it's. I think what you've described is a period of reflection and what you like to do, and I think that's really important. One of the first things you said was around, how am I going to spend the second half of my life? And I think sort of like exploring, like you have done, and you will help people to do is really good. What do you like doing? How do you like to spend that time? I really like what you said about how does that make you feel, because I think it's an opportunity, isn't it? Really about how you're gonna do that, and what you're gonna do, and looking at your talents, and I think it's really important to look at your what are your skills, what can you do well, and so and how can you transfer that, whether you're going to do it in a business like we have, or whether you're going to do something else, which is about just how do you like to spend your time. From my point of view, I did a similar thing, not as structured as you, Kathy, but I looked at my skills and how I like to spend my time. I think one of the things that I would add to that is like, if you were a very, very busy person, there's going to be a transition into becoming a less busy person, or if that's what you want to happen, and so that you can enjoy it. So, I probably went from busy to still busy, but what I'm thinking about now, and what I would encourage people to think about, is this is a time that you can do the things that you enjoy. It doesn't have to be do all the time, although that is good. But what do you enjoy doing just for the sake of doing it? So as well, to take that time. So that's the only thing that I would, from my own experience, that I would add to that.
All right, perfect. So let's help the folks who are already in their post-corporate phase of life. So the question that I would suggest comes from a writer who is also a mentor of mine. Her name is Christina Baldwin. And 20 years ago, she wrote a book called The Seven Whispers, where she explains how she found the connection to her inner guidance by posing two questions to herself. The first was, what do you want me to do? And the second is, and how do I need to change in order to do it? So I find that this helps me when I'm feeling directionless. It brings me this sense of calm, but it opens me to curiosity and a willingness to move toward something new. So you can try it while you're walking. I love doing that. When you walk and hold a question to see what comes up. Some days there may be silence, and other days you may get an insight. But just like I suggested before, just make sure you keep a pen and paper or your phone notes nearby where you can capture your words of wisdom. For the contemplation, I would suggest the same hand over heart exercise, but with a twist. And that is, being in liminal space, experiencing what it's like to be in liminal space just for those 5 minutes. And by liminal space, I mean the space in between two phases of life. The word liminal actually comes from the Latin that means threshold. You're at a threshold of a new way of being. You're neither in the old space, that's gone, but the new one isn't here yet. So it's like standing in this doorway between two rooms where a new life awaits in the room that you're just about to enter. And so this threshold is an exciting place where you can experience this identity transformation, but it's also a place of not knowing, which can cause distress and anxiety. And as someone who was probably paid to have the answers all the time, this space of not knowing is new. It's a new place to be. So I suggest the same hand over heart breathing exercise that I outlined before, just with one, just relax, what I call being in the goo, this liminal space of where your old identity is dissolved. You're no longer who you were, but it's unclear of who you're becoming just yet. Can you just relax in that space and just be in the goo and see what it feels like? What does it feel like to not know, to be okay with what's unfolding, of being in this formless state and inviting what's next? And then the action, I would say, take one step. And you get an extra point if it does not make logical sense for you. So this is important because we think that we can't. I certainly was in this camp. I can't move forward unless I have my whole plan laid out before me. That was really my MO. And I have found that that is not the case. In fact, one of my favorite quotes has become, it's a quote from poet Antonio Machado. And he says, "Pathmaker, there is no path. The path is made by walking. By walking, you make a path." And so what is the one step that you can take today? And here's the catch. It's the step that feels true to you. This was new to me as well. Not because I had to do it, not because I was paid to do it, not because somebody expected me to do it. What's something I really want to do? And taking that small step in that way helps you align to this future self that you're envisioning at this point in your life. So I would suggest taking that small step, getting on with your day, and tomorrow, taking another small step, and then just repeating that. So Dawn, please, anything that you'd like to share there?
Again, I love this description of, I guess, what is a journey, and also the time that you've sort of like detailed on both sides of the corporate space about taking time just to be and to contemplate. I love the sort of like going through a threshold into a new you, and I particularly like because I am the sort of person who does something intuitively, is that it's that, just taking that first step, but that step has to be what feels right for you, because then you will be happy with it and comfortable with it. And I'm a great one. If it feels right, then do it. Trust your intuition around doing it, and actually taking that step will make things happen. I know Kathy is quite a planned and structured person, so I'm really glad to hear that you didn't have to be to go forward. And I think that's something that people can struggle with, is that, not knowing exactly what's going to happen. But that's part of the for me, that's part of what's exciting. But I think for some people that can be quite anxiety provoking. But my what I'd like to share is to acknowledge that, and I like what you're saying about taking that hand over heart sort of thing, that sort of like experiencing that and go with it anyway, and then and see what happens. So I really, really like that. Did you discover this sort of like, I love this model, has this been a thing that's sort of come to you since you've retired? It's sort of like, you sort of detailing the process, because it's a lovely model. And tell us about how you did it and what you're going to do with it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's funny because it feels like all those years that I was creating board presentations, I realized it was this similar process. I just kind of changed the lens to taking a look at what I was doing. But when I created the course, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, I didn't realize that I was actually journaling my own. I was actually outlining the process that I went through. It wasn't until I was done that I was like, oh, that's what just happened to me. So it was this really odd. I think I was kind of in this meta phase of like, this metamorphosis was happening to me, yet I was trying to instruct others how to go through this process, not realizing that I was going through it myself. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's actually how it unfolded.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. One of the things that I did when I started my business, I started in not a very structured way and just went for it. And then somebody asked me how I did it. And what I had to do was then sort of like reverse engineer it. So what actually were the processes that I did? What did I actually do? And similarly to you, then things become clear. Things become clear actually. So, part of my business is around networking. And one of the things I discovered going through that is that I network quite naturally, but there is a process to it. There is a process to what I do. And I think, and again, and I've also realized being a nurse and asking people questions because, or getting information from people that don't necessarily want to give it to you. There's a process for doing it, a process for actually engaging with people, creating rapport, and that, I can use those transferable skills in my business. So there is a process that you go through. I really love that you talk about journaling and sort of like the visioning and things like that, because when you go back over that work, and I did a similar thing, then you can start to join the dots and then it makes sense about what you need to do when you go forward. So I really, really like that. I would love to hear a bit about the course that you've developed.
I know this is like the big reveal. Dawn is in this mastermind that we're in, and I've been keeping things undercover. So this is going to be a first reveal for you as well.
So I'm very excited to see that, because Kathy is a very planned and organized person. So, this is part of all of our journeys, really, isn't it? The people that are in the mastermind. So let's see.
All right. So first, why even create a course about mindfully descending the corporate ladder? And what I have found is that, and I fell into this category as well, almost everybody plans for their financial future, but few plan for their future life. And even though I felt like I was doing that, I still didn't do it to the extent I could have. So it takes time to truly consider how to find happiness and meaning outside of our long-time successful careers. Happiness and meaning aren't found on bucket lists, I've found. They're actually rooted in action, and they're the result of living a purposeful, healthy lifestyle aligned with who you truly are at this stage of life. There's been many articles that have been in the Wall Street Journal and the Times of people who have retired and have gone back to work because they weren't prepared for this. It's a very tender space when an old identity is dropped so a new one can begin to take shape. And so what would it be like to be with others who don't know the old you, but are rooting and supporting the new you? And that's why I created this course. It is really the one that I wish I had when I was considering retirement and navigating in this new world. And so throughout the course, students will work with 4 practices, actually. The practices of contemplation, of journaling, of positive action, and of holding a question. Students learn how to discern what's truly important to them at this stage of their lives. They give themselves permission to see things differently, to do things differently, and to be in this liminal space I've been talking about without form. They get to question past assumptions with self-compassion, which is something that we practice as they release what no longer serves them. They explore new activities and what it feels like to embody living from the heart, to take action by building habits to support their new identities and move in the direction of their envisioned future self, and to start ascending a new ladder of their choosing, if they choose, while learning to sustain their efforts and their wellness long term. This is what I call the journey from head to heart, from type A to type B. And so for the first time, I'm going to be offering this online course as a facilitated experience. So each week following the release of the video content, of the transcriptions and the worksheets and the audio files, I'll be holding a 1-hour discussion limited to 6 students. I'll have cohorts of 6 students, so it'll be a small group. And these discussions will include some additional insight from me and then a round of group coaching where we'll share the experience that we've had as we work through the material together. And so the reason for the discount is it's the first time I'm offering this, and I'm looking for students who are really excited about doing the work and are looking forward to working with other like-minded folks. So if you'd like to learn more, all you need to do is point the camera on your phone to the QA code, and it will bring you to Teachable, which is where the course is. You can see, take a look at the page that gives the course overview, the curriculum. And you can also have a sample of one of the lessons. So if you have any questions, you can send me a note through LinkedIn or through info@athenawellness.com. And I would welcome the opportunity to chat with you.
That's amazing. I'm just going to say, and I didn't clear this with Kathy before I did this, but if you've got any questions or any thoughts, put them in the chat. It's been really good to hear Kathy go through her experiences sort of like post pre and post corporate and the journey she's been on. It's been absolutely privileged. I've known Kathy for just over a year now, and to hear this journey to get to this point, and I'm really excited about the course and sort of the fruition of this work. I'm going to ask you a question, Kathy.
Okay.
What do you think that the main things that the main transformation people will get? Is it around having some more knowledge about yourself and planning? Is it talking to other students and sharing that sort of community experience? What do you think are the benefits that people are going to get from doing this course?
Yeah, I mean, I think the course material itself leads people through this metamorphosis, and that's like the theme that goes through the class of the caterpillar to the butterfly, right? There's this, we have become really good caterpillars in our professional lives, and when we put ourselves in the cocoon of retirement and we disintegrate into this goo of DNA that has the ability to become a butterfly, there's a process that we go through, and it's not by using the skills that we've used for decades. This requires a new set. So I think it's a new way of approaching life. I think it's much lighter. It's much more aligned. There's a sense of fulfillment that I'm sitting here today doing my work at home. Like, that has not gotten old, so the technology is here for us to make an impact in the world. We can do anything now. And it excites me. On the back end of the course, once people go through this, there's going to be an opportunity for us to gather as people now who want to make a difference in the world. And I'll talk a little bit about this at the end of what the possibilities are when we harness our experience and our wisdom and focus it out into the world for people who need it. That's what really gets me excited. So this class is really like a primer that we do this for ourselves first. But then what's on the other side of that? What can we do for the world and for others and to be of service in the world? That's what really gets me excited.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for taking us through that. I love the sort of metamorphosis into a butterfly. That's lovely. That ticks a lot of boxes for me. We were going to do some questions now because you were very organised and sort of asked for questions before we came to this webinar. So shall I ask them or will you ask them?
Actually, what I did was I took them and I put them into 3 buckets. And so maybe I'll tee up the bucket. I'll give you my thoughts, and then I'll turn it over and we'll take them one by one. I've got 3 buckets.
Okay, cool.
The first were the folks that were considering early retirement, but they were afraid of giving up a reliable paycheck. And I felt that pain. And I'll tell you a story in a minute. But before I tell that story, the one thing that I would always preface this with is, please don't put yourself in financial peril ever. And to the extent that you can be your own patron and plan for this, that's not always possible. I understand that. But if you're in this place of like, doesn't seem like it's the right time, it may just not be the right time, but you can still plan and do all the things that we've talked about. It's not wasted time. It's investment time. So I would preface my comments with that. But that said, you've heard enough of my story now that I can tell you about a month before I told my boss that I was going to make it official, I was going to retire. I was getting ready for work and I became paralyzed by fear, like gripped with fear. I just saw this reliable ATM machine that was working so well for 33 years. It just kept, anytime I needed to go to that ATM machine, I could, and that was going away. And I just had this moment of, are you out of your mind? My mom had passed about a year before and I could hear her, like, are you crazy? She grew up during the Depression. Like, are you crazy doing this? Kind of a feeling. But with that, I started to think about what I was doing because I was already planning for Athena Wellness. And I asked myself, if you were going to make your first hire, who would it be? And I realized that it would be me, who was my first hire, right? So, okay, it would be you, and you have this uncertain work situation, but you don't know with certainty what's going to unfold, but you feel like you've got your first step there. Like, what are you really afraid of? And suddenly this sense of calm came over me, and that sense of calm never left. It was just this, like, I knew that I couldn't go back, but I didn't know what was going to happen when I went forward, but I felt okay with that. And so my suggestion then would be to allow yourself to have this back and forth. I mean, that went all the way up until the time when those words actually came out of my mouth. So to give yourself that time, try on these different scenarios, but until you hit that sense of calm, again, if you have the luxury to do that, some people, that'll get to our next question, folks that don't have that luxury. But if you do have that luxury, it's okay to do this parallel path until you feel this sense of, you know what? There really is no going back now. I have to go forward in a new way. So that would be my suggestion for that question. How about you, Dawn?
So this question resonates with me so much, and part of the planning was the planning for this time, which I didn't know when that was going to be. So when I was a mortgage slave, I was working in a job that was quite well paid, but I didn't actually like that much. And I think my sort of contribution to that sort of is to do the planning and wait for the opportunity. Because if you're doing the planning and thinking about how it's going to be, what it's going to look like, I wasn't sort of au fait with manifestation before all this happened. But actually, if you're doing the plan and you are imagining it and you know what's going to be like, then the opportunity, you'll be able to take the opportunity when it presents itself. And that's what happened to me. I got laid off, and that gave me the opportunity to sort of like go forward with my dream to do that. But then saying that, I had a backup plan. I have a profession, and I know I'm privileged to have a profession, but I give myself, and I still do this actually, I give myself 6 months timescales and give myself outcomes that I want to achieve in those timescales. And the fallback position is, if it doesn't work out, I can go back and get a job, or what will I do if things don't go to plan? And it hasn't happened yet. And I think why it doesn't happen is because that's the nuclear option, is it sort of going back into the health service. I don't want to do that, so I do everything in my power so that doesn't happen. So I think for people who are worried about where the next paycheck is coming through, and I agree with you totally, Kathy, don't, but make the plan, and when the opportunity arises, things will come to you. One of the things I did is I had a plan to do things as a side hustle to test it out, to see how that would work in reality. And when the opportunity came to do it, I sort of took that opportunity with both hands. I'm not saying it wasn't with trepidation, because it was, but it's sort of like, so this is what you've been waiting for, Donnie. So crack on. So that's what I would say.
All right. The second one was, I was packaged out. Sounds like what you were just mentioning. I was packaged out suddenly and feel lost. So this is someone who didn't have the opportunity. And, first, I can only imagine. My heart goes out to this person because while I have been in my own goo, I have often wondered what would it have been like if I was just having a regular day at work and I was suddenly called into a conference room and that was it. My career was over in that day. So my recommendation is this is a time to treat yourself as kindly as possible, to go through the inevitable stages of grief, to feel those unpredictable emotions, probably ones that maybe you don't want to feel, and give yourself the grace and the space to just be in it. So this is one of those situations where you've been forced into the cocoon. You were put into one. You didn't wrap it around yourself. But now you have the choice of whether you want to give corporate or your professional life another go, or if you want to do something else. And it can be really hard to make choices like that when you're hurting. So my suggestion would be to give yourself some comfort and to give yourself some time. And if at all possible, to stay open to the extent you can, to invite the bewilderment of not knowing. Again, a skill set that we're not great at, and get used to living with these questions, these open-ended questions. So I hope that was helpful. Dawn, with your nurse practitioner background, is there anything you could do to help?
Yeah, I would totally agree. Is that life throws these things at us, doesn't it? Really, and I totally agree. It's a time for self-care. It's a time to acknowledge that what is the grief process, that any change or transition that you go through, that is part of it. What I would add or supplement, it's not adding, is that in times where you don't, I would, acknowledge whatever sadness or whatever pain that you might feel about the situation. So this happened to me, that the one of the things that helped me is to see what the opportunity is there, to take out of, what can be a difficult situation. It doesn't take away the difficulty, but I personally found that doing something positive that was part of some goals I had for myself helped with the situation. And I would add this, is that, if you're in this situation, the grief, because that is what it is, will come and go, and that you sort of like need to come back to what Kathy said about looking after yourself, and how that's going to, and how you're going to, the self-care that is required to get you through any difficult situation. But this can be a difficult situation. So that's what I would say in addition to you, Kathy.
Excellent. And then in the interest of time, because Dawn and I are sticklers for time and we're going to end on the hour, I'm going to take the last question since it feels more audit related, and then we'll give our closing remarks. So the question was, I'm retired and have many interests, but I feel like I'm just filling my time and not contributing. And to this person, I would say my suggestion here is to think about what your intentions are for this time in your life. Are you looking to travel? Are you looking to make community impact, spend quality time with family? Do you want to do an activity that you love, a hobby? If you had all the money and time in the world, where would you be spending your time? And then I would take an inventory of how you're spending your time today. What is it that you're doing? Rough estimates of where you're spending your time, especially, and I would pay attention to those times that are quote unquote, very sneaky time wasters, right? So are there times where you're kind of spinning your wheels or doing things that you wouldn't do otherwise? And then I would overlay those lists. How much of what you're doing right now is getting you to where you want to be? And that's what I would look for. And then I would make adjustments accordingly. So with that, I'm going to move to our closing comments. And Dawn, I'll invite you for your closing remarks.
Thank you, Kathy. Well, thank you so much for, first of all, sharing your journey and your experiences. And I really love it's about reimagining it, that it's not an end. It's a sort of a continuation of a journey. Lots that you said has resonated with me, and sort of like, my post-corporate life and sort of and retirement. I think there's lots of different ways to do things. And I think I really like how Kathy it's a time for self-reflection and thinking about what you want going forward. And I think that's a positive thing. So thank you so much, Kathy, for that.
Appreciate that. And thank you so much for being here. I wanted to close by saying that I recently wrote a blog post entitled "Retirement is a Verb." And it was based on the story of a lawyer who, in 1965, donated 1 hour of pro bono legal time each week after being enraged by an injustice he witnessed on the evening news. The man who was telling this story was the recipient of the lawyer's work and grew up to be an Ivy League scholar and an athlete, and today serves as a U.S. Senator. And it made me wonder what might be possible if we harness this kind of energy. What if we put our time and attention into what Stephen Covey calls the circle of influence, on things that we have the ability to take action on? And the more we focus on what we influence, the more change and impact we can have. And that's the power that we can have as we embark on this new phase of life. Conversely, what a disservice it would be if we don't offer up our experience and our wisdom to those who can benefit. So, how will you choose to repurpose your time that you once devoted to your career? How can you best leverage your lifetime of experience and talent that you've honed for decades? Just 1 hour a week changed the trajectory of a person's life. And you can do the same. By staying in this circle of influence, not only will it expand, but it's been found that it actually enhances your own well-being with positivity and optimism and radiance. So I will leave you with those thoughts. Retirement is a verb, and the world needs your experience and wisdom. And I can't wait to see what you do out there. I want to thank Dawn Jarvis for being such a generous and gracious co-host. And I want to thank you. It has really been a privilege to spend this time with you. And both Dawn and I hope that you will keep in touch. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I know there are many ways you can spend your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with me. Until our paths cross again, be kind to yourself and show your warrior spirit some love. If you know anyone who could benefit from today's episode, please pass it on. And many thanks for supporting the show by subscribing and leaving a review. It means a lot, and it helps others find their way to our circle. If you'd like to access the show notes, have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode, or would like a transcript of this episode, visit www.athenawellness.com/podcast. Until next time, be well.